Now, I am very pleased to welcome in studio this evening a woman who is actually at today's House Oversight Committee hearing, Miss Katie Pavlich from townhall.com. How you doing, Katie?
Good. How are you?
Excellent.
Good.
All right. So what was your take on today's hearing?
Well, I think we found out even more that there's a cover-up going on. You had William Newell, who's a former ATF special agent in charge, with emails back and forth with the White House, yet he tried to claim that walking guns into Mexico was never the plan or the goal of this operation. What I thought was interesting is he never mentioned Operation Fast and Furious. In his testimony, in his statements, he always talked about Project Gunrunner, the efforts there, which makes me think, going back to looking at the budget, they were covering up Operation Fast and Furious under the name of Project Gunrunner, although they're two completely separate programs.
Yeah, because Project Gunrunner is, I mean, this is sort of the umbrella name for a lot of different operations, for basically every operation on the border. Now, you know, it's interesting that that's where your mind takes you. My mind, maybe I'm a little bit more conspiratorially minded than you, because my mind says, all right, if he's not talking about Fast and Furious, he's talking about Project Gunrunner, how many other operations perhaps had similar things? You know, one of the things we learned this email that was sent from Newell to Kevin O'Reilly at the National Security Council.
At the White House.
At the White House. And he said, you didn't get these from me. He said the first attachment is what we were going to hand out to the media prior to our planned August 26th, 2010 press conference. We will still use this if we ever do a press conference. It's been vetted through ATF headquarters. The second Word doc is what we were going to give to Melson as notes in case he got asked specific questions about our industry operation efforts during GRIT. Now, I did a little bit of research about what GRIT was, and GRIT was a 2-month-long operation in Houston, Texas.
Where Carter's Country Gun Stores is located.
Exactly,
yes.
where Carter's Country Gun Store is located, where the attorney for Carter's Country says Bill Carter had same thing happening. You know, suspicious characters would walk in wanting to buy guns. He'd contact ATF, and ATF would say, "Oh yeah, let them go." And then they'd show up in Mexico.
And then they would blame them for it. They were accusing the gun stores of being the source for cartel weapons, when really they were doing what ATF was telling them to do. Now,
the press releases and everything for GRIT talk about the number of firearms that were interdicted and the number of indictments that were issued. But you can find similar statements about Fast and Furious. Look, people have been indicted in Fast and Furious. There's no doubt about it. The question is, was it worth letting thousands of guns go to Mexico in order to get these 20 indictments when you have ATF agents today who are saying you didn't need to do this to get these indictments?
Well, what I thought was pretty alarming today is Mr. Newell, who was very heavily involved in the oversight of this, would not admit that this was a bad idea. And he would not say that he would never do this again. And he said that there was a risk assessment involved. And Darrell Issa said, what about people? What about the people in Mexico? What about the people in America? You know, there's lives at stake. And the fact that he wouldn't say this was a bad idea and that he was defending the program was very alarming to me. And he also kind of got caught up in his own, you know, presenting two stories on the issue. He admitted that he knew about this in January 2009, yet the program didn't stop until January 2010. Yet throughout the hearing, he was saying that walking guns into Mexico wasn't the goal. Now, we just talked about how he was calling this project Gunrunner. What does Gunrunner mean? It means you're running guns. I mean, where are those guns going?
Let me stop and correct the dates just for a second here, because November of 2009, not January of 2009. November of 2009 is when they, because that's the other thing. They've tried to float it out here that, oh, no, this was actually a Bush administration project.
Exactly.
No. November of 2009, they become aware that these guns are showing up in Mexico. January of 2010, there's this memo where they talk about, we're going to let this continue. And they did. They let it continue all the way up to the murder of Brian Terry.
Which is when they, you know, this email that you just read, they submitted, Newell sent this email saying, I don't want people to have the perception that we are running guns into Mexico. Yet today he continued to claim that that wasn't the goal of the agency, and the ATF agents who were in testimony today refuted that. And we saw in the second Fast and Furious hearing that they said that wasn't true, that the initial goal from the beginning was to put guns in the hands of cartels. And so another thing that came out of the hearing today that we've all known is that ATF agents in Mexico were left completely in the dark on this issue. So they kept finding these guns, and they noticed that they were being traced back to ATF and saying, hey guys, what's going on with your Phoenix office? Because we keep finding, guns at violent crime scenes down here, and you haven't, told us what's going on. And they were being told by officials in the Phoenix office and in Washington, D.C. that it's under investigation. We're still looking into it. Yet they were told they were going to stop the program in July 2010. It continued. So it was just a major, major problem. Agents in Mexico who were dealing more directly with the cartels, quite frankly,
right,
were left completely in the dark on the issue.
Yeah, and that's the thing. If we are supposed to believe Bill Newell, and if we're supposed to believe the Obama administration's line on this,
right,
once the guns went to Mexico, we would then somehow use that knowledge to go after the drug kingpins.
Right.
That we've heard that word a lot, kingpins.
Right.
And yet, if you don't tell law enforcement in Mexico about the operation, if your own ATF officials in Mexico don't know about the operation, then how do you go after the kingpins?
And that was a pretty funny part of testimony where Mr. Newell actually got laughed at by many members of the committee, because he said, well, this was a goal of ours to go into Mexico and find the kingpins. And someone asked, well, how are you going to do that if you weren't going to send people in there to extradite them to the United States for prosecution? Because he said the goal wasn't to bring them back to the United States. And then he said that they wanted the Mexican government to prosecute them. And then the other question came up of, how are you going to do that when you never told the Mexican government or Mexican officials or even ATF officials working in Mexico that this was going on? I mean, why do you think that you could prosecute them there? But going back to, we always ask the question of how high up did this go? I'm focused on Mr. Newell because he gave the most non-answer answers, I think, out of anyone today. Because he didn't answer any questions directly, but I think that gave us more information. But he did have an admission of, DEA was involved, and now we know that the IRS was involved. What can go wrong, right, when the IRS is involved with something?
What government agency wasn't involved
exactly.
at this point?
So it's really hard for me. He was trying to sell the idea that this was a Phoenix-based operation handed out by low-level ATF operatives in that office, nothing higher. And unfortunately, Democrats on the committee are also saying that. They're saying it was born and raised in one office. However, after Newell was trying to sell this line of it was low-level agents gone awry, he admitted that there were 5 major government agencies involved, including, we found out that he was emailing National Security Advisor at the White House.
Yeah.
I mean, you cannot sell both of those, especially in the same hearing, and expect people to believe you.
Look, this was so widespread. Apparently, the EEOC was involved, making sure that these straw purchasers all fit into the correct demographic brackets. We didn't want to get in trouble.
Yeah.
No, but seriously, you're right. That is the story and the narrative that's being advanced, but it doesn't match up. I mean, we heard that Lanny Brewer, who's the Assistant Attorney General, the head of the Criminal Division at the Department of Justice, was aware of this. That there were meetings in which Fast and Furious was discussed, in which the head of the ATF office in L.A., the head of the ATF office in Houston, Texas, were in on the discussions.
Right.
I'd like to know, by the way, why the head of the ATF in L.A. and Houston were involved in a discussion about an operation that was supposedly low level, entirely based out of the Phoenix office.
Yeah, I know. And we also saw, Democrats blaming this on Congress for not having strict enough gun reporting laws, and that they didn't think it was fair for ATF to be disciplined, and Representative Cummings said he didn't want the morale of the agency to be down. But it was one other interesting thing is a lot of the ATF, especially Carlos Canino, was there, and he was saying that this isn't in the ATF playbook. You do not let guns walk. That's the first thing they drill into your head when you go into training. So it was inconceivable to him that this was going to happen. However, you have and people would lose their jobs if you even lost track of a weapon. A single one. And no one has lost their job. No one has there's 2,000 guns missing.
And if you lose your own sidearm,
you're done.
It's a 3-day suspension, I think he said.
Right, you're done. You have disciplinary action taken against you, yet you have 40,000 people in Mexico dead, 2 federal agents from America dead, and no one has lost their job over this. And it was interesting, too, to hear today the DOJ armed these cartels to the point that they were arming the equivalent of a Marine regiment. I mean, this was not a small thing that they did. Yeah. They were pretty much arming people to go to war. And what's scary is the Congressman Issa talked about this at the end of the hearing. He said, we have a narco state on the brink down in Mexico, which we do. I don't think people really realize how extreme it is there. And he mentioned, they have enough money to pay off officials in Mexico. They have enough money to pay off officials in the United States. They basically run everything, and the U.S. government's giving them the tools they need to do it.
Hope and change.
Yeah, hope and change. So.
Wow. Well, listen, Katie, I'm glad you could join us this evening. I really appreciate your coverage. Keep up the great work.
No problem. It's an important issue, so we'll be on it.
All right. Katie Pavlich from townhall.com with us here in studio.